Are you exhausted by chronic mental gymnastics? Those topsy-turvy cognitive gyrations that get in the way of what you want to be thinking and doing? I've found that people are increasingly plagued by obsessive or negative thought patterns that foster anxiety, depression, and that ongoing stress that can lead to severe burnout. The secret to creating a healthy mindset and the positive changes that follow can be found in the art of gently training your mind to intentionally choose thoughts and behaviors that work for you rather than against you. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. Can you please help me find a way to stop obsessing about everything? My boyfriend says he is sick of me constantly worrying about our relationship. He says I stress him out by thinking about how things will go bad instead of how they could go right. I get that he's irritated, but I can't stop myself. And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manly, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note this episode may contain sensitive information. Listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Dr. Nekeshia Hammond, who will be sharing her expertise on holistic self-care, burnout prevention, and mindset training. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Nekeshia. It's so lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
So, before we launch into the topic of the day, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Sure. So, what makes me me is I would definitely say perseverance is a good word. And just learning how to continue to grow as a person, how to handle the bumps in the road and the obstacles and the detours that life gives us oftentimes, but just continually being in a mindset to grow through those life lessons and continue to find ways to help other people in the process as well.
You put that very eloquently, and I appreciate that. Perseverance is certainly key. And I also like how you highlighted that journey of self-growth, that it's some people don't engage in it at all. And for some people, that's just one of the most, if not the most important parts of life, and that it takes intention. We
Yes.
don't grow in positive ways unless we really dive in and work it. So thank you. I am curious for those who are watching the video of this. I'm seeing a an orange football and an orange Gator football helmet in the background. That's telling
Yes.
me perhaps you live in Florida or have something to do with I'm guessing the Gators must be a football team.
Yes. Yes. I live in Florida, but that's my alma mater. I went to the University of Florida. I am
Mm.
a diehard college football fan of the Florida Gators. So, yes, I
You
basically
highlight
I
those.
bleed orange and blue. Yes.
I like that. So, thank you for that little tidbit about yourself. Go Gators.
Yes, go Gators.
So let's launch into you have so much wisdom in the area of mindset training. You have authored a book about mindset training that our listeners, you can find that in the show notes. But it's so important when we're thinking about how to take charge of our minds, because as I well know, having been there, our minds can take charge of us, and then
Yeah.
we feel like we are at their mercy. And it's something you and I work with, clients and groups on, helping people understand that they don't need to be at the mercy of whatever those mental gymnastics are, those back and forth scripts and little hamster wheel thoughts that are going round and round. So, can you guide us into some of those basics?
Yes, and it is a process. So I don't want I want to remind people it's not an overnight process for sure. But when you really dive into the journey of inner work and retraining your brain and starting to really become aware of your thoughts and the patterns that happen in your negative thoughts, especially, all of us have some sort of story that we're telling ourselves. Sometimes it's I'm not good enough, or I'm not this enough, or I'm not that enough, or I don't have this, like those types of negative thoughts. And unfortunately, what happens when we continue to dwell in that mindset is it really can lead to more anxiety or lead to depression. But the good news is when we start to work on taking control of our thoughts, then and managing those thoughts that are coming in, then we can do more preventative work. And I do want to remind people too, because I don't want to minimize, this is a spectrum when it comes to negative thinking. So in some cases, you try things on your own and it's not enough, and you might need the help of a mental health professional, which is completely okay if you have to take that step. But it's very doable to really work on ourselves and do that inner work.
I so appreciate that you brought up that vital piece that sometimes we can do the work ourselves. We absolutely
Yeah.
can. And sometimes we need assistance. It's the
Yes.
same with whether it's, a landscaping project or a project at work or a home
Yep.
repair. Sometimes we can do something ourselves, and
Yep.
sometimes we need somebody to help guide us on the way. And it's
Exactly.
interesting in the realm of mental health, people have been often raised to think that seeking mental health care, that kind of support,
Hmm.
is a negative. Whereas, hey, if I want to learn gymnastics or something, I'm not going to think twice about reaching out for a coach. I'm going to want
Exactly.
that to make sure that I'm in top form, or at least as top as I could get. And so
Yeah.
we want to look at all of this, as you said, on a spectrum. If you're at a place on that spectrum where you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just at the mercy of these chronic negative thoughts, and I've tried meditation and I've tried journaling and I've tried this and I've tried that, well, then it simply means you need some support.
Yeah.
And that's all it means. It doesn't mean you're bad or broken or
No.
stupid or anything like that. It simply means you, like all of us, are imperfect and need a little bit of support or a lot of support, and that too is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really is, unfortunately, as we know, with the stigma of mental health, is one of the reasons why, as a society, we tend to hesitate. Like you said, like we're afraid, like, what if people think I'm crazy? Or what if people think I'm stupid or weak or all these things that are not true? Because I find that when it comes to other areas of growth, just even actually, like you said, like a do-it-yourself home project, like either you can do it or you need the help of someone else. The same thing with working out. Sometimes you can do it on your own, or you need to be in group classes, getting coaching, or business, you need coaching. Like there's so many other areas that we depend on other people in a good way to help us through. And I hate that sometimes we stop when it comes to our mental health, though. We're like, oh, we don't want to ask anyone. We'll ask on the physical health side, right? We'll maybe hopefully go to the doctor, go to the physician to get that guidance. But when it comes to the mental health side, then we take a pause. So my hope for society is that we understand more how important it is for us to focus on our mental health as well, and get the guidance and the support that you need if you're not able to do those if the tools that you're doing at home are not enough, because there's nothing wrong with seeking the help of a mental health professional.
That's, and I love that you brought up the piece about the physicians, because
Yes.
if I found myself with a broken leg or, you know, something else happening on my body, and oh my goodness, I need to go see my doctor. I need to
Yeah.
see my physician. And when we have broken thought patterns, when neurobiologically we have somehow become wired, often through
Yeah.
generally through no fault of our own. We didn't
Of
ask our
course.
brain to get topsy-turvy, some sort
Mm-mm.
of trauma, or maybe just a genetic predisposition. Something's happened. So that part is a little broken. And
Yeah.
when we have something that's a little broken on a neurobiological level, let's just dive in, maybe do some self work. And if that's not working, maybe then find a book such as yours. And I want to highlight your book,
Mm.
Mindset Training Conquer Your Mind, and the rest will follow. When we realize that if we try those steps, and sometimes they're sufficient, they're more than enough, and
Mhm.
sometimes we also want a mental health practitioner in tandem with all of those other pieces. And
Yes.
so I think for the person who wrote in, that's a really good place to start because it sounds as if it is a part of their life. It's not just limited to the interactions with the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Sounds as if they are having trouble with this kind of broken record in their mind that is having them worry constantly, prepare for the worst constantly,
Hmm.
and thus create stress not just for the individual, but for those in proximity to that individual.
Yes, for sure. And I always say there's no trophy out there for suffering. Like you don't have to live that way. Like we don't have to live in a constant state of worry and panic and anxiety and depression and fear because there's tools out there to help with our mental state, but the most important things is to make sure we're connecting ourselves to those resources. And sometimes it's a mental health professional, sometimes it's a coach, it's a mentor, it's a best friend, it's someone at a place of worship. Like their help comes in a lot of different forms. But it's really critically important for us to make sure we're connecting ourselves to those resources and work on understanding that we deserve to be emotionally healthy. We deserve to be happy. We deserve to have joy. We deserve to have full and like fulfilling lives as well.
I like that you said that there is no trophy for suffering
There's none.
because that is a mindset, and we're talking about
Yes.
mindsets. And if we have a mindset that is saying something like, I need to suffer, I should
Hmm.
suffer, suffer is my normal state, suffer is what my mom did, suffering makes me stronger.
Hmm.
We can choose
Yeah.
to shift that mindset into something like, rather than going the complete opposite, I don't want to suffer, we can go something more positive, which is, I want to have a life of
Yes.
ease. I
Yes.
want to have thoughts that feel good to me. I
Yeah.
want to have thoughts that allow me to connect with others and allow them to connect with me. And those might, listeners, feel very unfamiliar to you. And as Dr. Nekeshia said already, it's baby steps.
Yes.
All of this self work is
Yes.
baby steps. And I realize for me in my life, even though I'm a mental health professional, I don't ever stop doing my baby steps. They
Oh
look
yeah.
different, they're
Hmm.
easier some
Hmm.
days, but that journey of self work, it is something that it gets rusty if you don't practice it and
Yeah.
you don't baby step your way toward that next level that we hope that next level does bring more ease and joy.
Yeah. I'm a huge advocate of baby steps. I feel like I've used that term. I think, yeah, it's definitely in the book, of taking the baby steps sometimes because especially when we're struggling or we're in a dark season of our lives, it's hard to think of taking a leap. Like your brain, it's just too much and it's overwhelming. But if you remind yourself that the baby steps count too, like one of the strategies I put in the book is, and one of my favorite strategies that I used after I hit burnout and needed to make some changes in my life is called take a minute, which is essentially finding 60 seconds a day for yourself to reset and recharge your brain and your body. We are constantly on the go, go, go. There's things happening in the world and social media, our family, our friends. It is overwhelming and stressful for our minds and bodies. But when we take the baby step, even if you need to say, okay, what is it that I need to do in this day to pause and reflect and do something that brings me joy, even if it's just taking some deep breaths, that is the baby step that can start a snowball, and really continue the inner work that we all need to do.
Thank you. So we're already starting off with some really good nuggets
Yeah.
of, I love that piece of just take 60 seconds. If we think about it, that can be, 8 nice inhalations and exhalations.
Yeah.
That 60 seconds can be sitting with that cup of tea in our hands and
Yep.
just being, and
Hmm.
warding off thoughts or just letting the thoughts float by. 60 seconds that's doable.
Very doable.
That's doable.
Yes.
60
Yes.
seconds. I like doable. I have a question so that our listeners can know where you are starting from. How do you define mindset?
Yeah. I define it, I like to think of mindset holistically. So I like to think of it as where are we at as far as like our physical self-care, mental self-care, emotional self-care, and our spiritual self-care. Because a lot of this starts in our mind. And a lot of times we have to think of where are we at and where are we trying to be at if we're trying to be better versions of ourselves. But again, there's different aspects of who we are and where is your mind related to your growth in those four areas.
Got it. So the way you define mindset from that holistic stance is, where are you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually?
Yes.
I'm almost seeing those four pieces, and that we take a thermometer and dip it in there
Hmm.
and take our temperature,
Yes.
perhaps of each one. Where am I physically? And listeners, you're welcome to do this, right now. Just imagine your physical body and putting a thermometer in that says, maybe zero, not good at all, and then numbers up to a 10, and 10 is like, wow, awesome.
Yes.
And being able to just take at that temperature. Where am I physically? Where am I mentally? What's happening with my thoughts? Where am I emotionally? How are my emotions? Where am I spiritually? Which doesn't mean that there has to be religion in there. It surely can, but where is, you might even think of it as where's your energy? And by learning, I can see us doing this in that 60-second piece
Hmm.
that you're talking about, because we often are so busy doing,
Yes.
taking care of others, that we
Yes.
forget to put that either thermometer or that oil dipstick, for those of you who have ever had to check your oil, right? You
Yeah.
you put that in there, or check the temperature on a turkey, whatever it is that resonates with you. Maybe get used to, because honestly, I have to say I have probably never done that. I have never segmented all of those four parts. I've often asked myself, how am I doing? And I just go like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel physically well. Oh, I feel energetic. Oh, I feel a little sad. But I like this method of taking the temperature of those four distinct areas. That's brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Nekeshia.
You're welcome. And it absolutely is a process, and you're so right. I remember growing up too, during that time, I feel like I didn't remember any conversations about self-care or mental health or anything like that. It was more like just finish the next project, get to the next achievement, almost like teaching you to be a machine, which is not a good thing because you will burn out if you're not taking care of yourself. But it is a mental process as well, even to get to the point where you say, I deserve to have my needs met, my goals met, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I deserve to check in with myself. I deserve to take these steps. That I've found for a lot of people is also a mental shift that we need to work on, because we do deserve these things. But sometimes it's hard because, like you said, we have whatever happened to us yesterday or our childhood or something we did or something someone did to us. Like there's all these things that just are going on in our heads, and we have to really take that shift to work on ourselves and focusing on ourselves, which is not easy for everyone, and that's okay. It's a process.
Absolutely. And I really invite our listeners to realize your patterns become hardwired in your brain.
Yeah.
And so if you've been patterned to go, 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 do for 2 decades, 3 decades, 20 decades, 100 decades, however old you are,
Yeah.
that means it's just more hardwired. The gift of neuroplasticity means that our brains are plastic. We're not cemented. It might take
Yes.
practice and patience and lots of baby steps. But if we find that we're not engaging in self-care, for example, that beautiful image you gave of being able to test each of those areas of your
Hmm.
being. If you get used to doing that for a week and then you repeat that week for 3 weeks, that's already getting cemented. And by the time
Sure.
you get to doing that for 6 months, it could likely be strong enough to stay with you naturally for a lifetime.
Yes.
That's how habit formation works.
Hmm.
And so all that we're talking about here is changing your mental habits.
Hmm.
And you listeners can do that. And Dr. Nekeshia is guiding us into more of how that can happen. So for our listener, sounds like she has two key issues. And let's go with the first one.
Hmm.
One is this obsessiveness. And then the other one is, she's obsessing about the relationship. And the other one is that, and I've heard this so much in my practices, I'm sure you have, where people are constantly preparing for the worst. Because if
Yeah.
I can prepare my mind, just go for the worst, then I'm prepared if the worst happens. If something good happens, then, oh, at least I have a bonus on this day. It didn't go as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
Yet that preparation for the worst often drives us. I remember working with a couple where the husband was constantly saying, it's going to go bad. I know this conversation's going to go bad. Everything's going to go downhill. And often just that sheer force of that
Hmm.
mindset was sending it there. But that's part two. I'm already getting into part two. Let's work, please, first on the obsessive. How can she work with being so obsessive about her relationship that it's something's going to happen, it'll go wrong?
Yeah, a lot of times with anxiety, it occurs mentally and or physically. So oftentimes what's helpful for people with anxiety is working on taking deep breaths. And I know it sounds so simplistic, but there's so much research on the benefits of taking the pauses, taking the deep breathing, because what it's doing is it's trying to reset your brain that's on overdrive when it comes to anxiety, and also your body. Because for some people with anxiety, you may have, in addition to maybe like racing thoughts, you may have your palms are getting sweaty, your heart rate's going up, your blood pressure's going up. Like all these physical things are happening to you in this sort of fight or flight mode. But it's really critically important to be working on things like taking mindful moments. So even if it's like when you're brushing your teeth, you're paying attention to every step that you're doing. You're paying attention to turning on the water, getting the toothbrush wet, putting the toothpaste on, like just really being focused and mindful in that moment, as well as spending some time during the day in some deep breathing to work on shifting your body and mind into calmer spaces. But again, it's a really helpful tool for anxiety. It does take practice, like anything. It's not something to start day one and it just magically makes anxiety go away. It's something that can be done uh, over time because you have to retrain your brain when you get to that, oh my gosh, what something bad happens, to calm your mind and body down. When the thought comes up again, the anxious thought comes up again, calm your mind and body down. Like it's a process. And again, you can try this on your own or reach out to a mental health professional who can guide you, week by week or however many sessions it is to go through that type of process.
So, thank you so much for that. And when we look at the obsessive thoughts, constantly worrying about the relationship, first off, it tells me that the person is likely has an insecure attachment style.
Mhm.
And in this case, highly anxious around attachment and preoccupied about the
Yeah.
relationship. So, as she works, or I shouldn't say she, maybe they, as they work to reset the brain, to use these breathing techniques, deep breath in, deep breath out. And I especially like doing counting or visualization with
Yes.
breathing because then we can't think. If we're
Yes.
counting in, as we say, inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yep.
exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, try and obsess at the same time you're doing that. It
Yeah.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's how we really downregulate the nervous system. We halt that fight or flight, which is, getting fed by the obsessive thoughts,
Yep.
whatever those thoughts are. And we can really see that breathing does, it brings on that wonderful sense of security and safety when we practice it and get
Yes.
used to it. And I love breathing techniques because they're free.
Yes.
They're portable. You can
Uh-huh.
do them anytime, anywhere. You can
Yeah.
do them in an airport. You can do them in the middle of a conversation and say, hey, I need to take time out and do my breathing. And I've worked with clients where they get used to doing breathing exercises, and then their kiddos come and
Yeah.
sit next to them because they like that energy of seeing
Hmm.
mom and or dad sitting there doing the breathing because it feels good, because it feels calming to the nervous system.
Yes.
So we like bringing that parasympathetic nervous system on board. It does interrupt those thoughts. So let's imagine that this individual is saying, okay, but the breathing isn't working for me. Or until it gets to be routine, how can I stop these obsessive thoughts? What would you recommend?
Yeah, and it's hard to stop the thinking, especially our negative thinking, but it takes time, but it's a process to recognize the thoughts and what the themes are of the negative thinking, and then work on when you have those thoughts that pop up to replace them with something more positive, which again takes time. I wish I had a magic solution that just worked day one, but these things take time when we have to retrain our brain. But if the theme of the thought, for example, is like, oh my gosh, I know something bad's going to happen. Oh my goodness, something bad's going to happen. It's like when you catch yourself in that thought, you try to replace it with whatever thought that works best for you. Like, I am safe. I am okay in this moment, which you are. Um, Things could go right. What if things did go well? Like those types of things to try to replace it each time you're having that thought. Because it's harder in the beginning. Our negative thoughts are not going to magically go away, but it's easier to start to take the pause when those thoughts come and try to think about something else instead. And even if you don't believe it right then and there, it's okay. Even if you say to yourself, what if something great happens today and you don't believe that, but you're still training your brain to get into the mindset and get out of the always something negative could happen, something bad is going to happen. So it's a process. Again, like everything, it's a process.
Thank you for that piece on how, in truth, this is all a process and one that
Yes.
I like to see as not only customizable,
Hmm.
but really important to customize because things that might work for one person
Exactly.
may not work for another person. For
Hmm.
someone who's really anxious, one technique could, lead them away from a panic attack. For another
Yeah,
person, that technique could lead them, more into a panic attack or
exactly.
into a deeper state of obsession. So, listeners, take everything that we're saying, use it to customize an approach using mindfulness about
Yes.
what resonates with you, what
Hmm.
feels right. And whatever feels right, even if it's not a quick fix, you'll know by listening to your body, your mind, and your spirit, you'll know, this is a good tool. And then you have a new tool to put
Yeah.
in your toolkit. You can make a journal note about what worked well. And so what we've already talked about are using strategies of thought replacement, so taking a negative thought, replacing it with a positive one that may not always feel accurate, but maybe getting it to a place. So, for example, if the listener who wrote in is thinking, I am afraid my boyfriend will cheat on me, and there's no evidence it's a very faithful boyfriend, then the thought replacement might be, I am going to work on feeling safe with my boyfriend.
Hmm.
I am going to work on looking at all the things my boyfriend does to make me feel seen and safe. That's an idea
Yeah.
of a thought replacement. And then you talked about thought stopping. These
Yeah.
are all cognitive behavioral therapy, terms that really work. CBT works really well. And
Yeah.
thought stopping simply means telling that thought, I am not going to entertain you. And
Mhm.
I often think of putting out an unwelcome mat at your door. Like you can put that mat out at the door of your mind and say, no, this thought isn't welcome. It's not serving me. So that's called thought stopping. There's another technique, and I'm wondering if you find it effective. I call it thought leaning. So
Hmm.
if we're having a sort of disastrous thought, and this goes into that second part already, where the individual's always preparing for the worst, I like instead of saying, don't think about what the worst, oh, go ahead. Tell me the worst that could happen. Tell me that absolute worst outcome. Oh, I come home and my boyfriend is in bed with another person or five other people or whatever it might be. And you go, oh, yeah, how does that make you feel? Oh, I feel really mad. Oh, okay. If you came home and that's what you found, what would you do? I'd pack up my stuff and I'd leave and, I'd do whatever they do. Or I'd go for a walk or I'd shout or I'd scream, whatever they say. It's like, oh, could you handle that? Could you handle that? Well, yeah, but I'd be really sad and I'd be really mad. But yeah, could you handle it? And they generally come to a place of, yeah, so now that we've moved into the worst case scenario and we realize that thought isn't prohibited,
Hmm.
then, so that's what I call thought leaning. What
I
do you
like it.
think of that technique?
I love it. It's very true. And a lot of times, like the vast majority of the times, our worst case scenario that we're worrying about is never going to come true anyhow. But I like what you were saying for us even to think about, well, if it did with the 4% chance or whatnot, whatever percent chance that it did happen, what would your reaction be, right? Because we often don't think about that part. Like the fact that we could get through whatever situation that may be. And we could handle it if that very low percentage chance of that thing that we're worrying about actually happened.
I agree with you because when we lean into, when I'm working with someone who's getting, coaching them on, say, a big speech or something, and they're like, I'm really terrified. I'm really terrified. Okay, tell me the worst that could happen. Well, I
Yeah.
get up on this stage and I can't remember a word, or I get up on the stage and I fall. Okay, well, let's lean into those. If you can't remember a word, what would happen? Well, I'd be really embarrassed and people would laugh at me and I'd be hooted off the stage or whatever it is. Like, okay, now, do you have a backup script with you in this scenario? Well, yeah, there's probably someone off stage who could bring me my script. Okay, could you create a joke to as a filler, like, shoot, my worst case happened.
Mhm.
Anybody resonate with this? And people get it
Yeah.
because we've all, at some point or at many points in our lives, we've had something happen where there was a pretty worst case scenario or almost worst case scenario. So when we envision it and see all the ways we could handle it, maybe not with joy, but with a little bit of grace, and would come through the
Yes.
other side. And who knows in that situation how much the audience would bond with us
Hmm.
because they see we're human.
Yes. Very true. Yes, we have to give ourselves grace because it's so hard. And even all of the things that we're sharing today, honestly, like it's a process. It takes time. We have to give ourselves grace, especially when it comes to mental health. One of the questions that I get often when I work with different organizations and groups on burnout prevention, it's like, well, how long is it going to take? Like, like it's magically going to change our lives in a day or 3 days. And I think about, if let's say we had the goal to lose 20 pounds, we know that it's not going to happen overnight. Like it's just not you know, in 3 days it's going to happen type of thing. It takes time. There's different steps, different things you have to do, exercises, and diet, and all that sort of thing. So it's really the same thing when it comes to our mental health. But I really strongly encourage people also to not beat yourself up in the process and just really give yourself grace, like you said.
I appreciate that you paused on the grace element because we live in a world where there's so much critical energy. so much comparative energy, so much
Mhm.
negative energy. And when we learn to give ourselves grace, just to kind of slow down and be like, oh, I leaned into that thought again and it wasn't really helping me. Oops, well, let me shift it this way. Then we become gentler with ourselves, our self esteem grows, and we have a different energy, and people can feel that energy because we all feel each other's energy,
Yeah.
right? And so when we give ourselves grace, it does create this flexibility and this suppleness that helps us not only in the moment, but it builds resilience and it helps us continue that journey, that self evolution journey, with more ongoing grace and joy and
Yeah.
patience for ourselves and other people.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back when we were talking about the thought leaning experiment. It's
Mhm.
interesting because if we see the listener who wrote in and being able to envision this really worst case scenario, and okay, so it's awful and the partner does cheat and it's just a terrible experience, a horrific experience. Okay, now we leaned into the worst of it. Now, what do we do to grow from that experience? And that's where we often don't go. We
Mhm.
don't go to that step of saying, okay, if things do go badly, whether it's a speaking engagement that we were talking about or the issue with a boyfriend, a relationship, if we look at that and say, how can I grow? Now we've taken our thoughts away from the obsession.
Mhm.
Now we've leaned into, okay, well, if something not so great happens, because that's where we learn. So,
Mhm.
I mean, so much of my life is I've learned the most when
Yeah.
things weren't going well. When things are easy and, I'm in a groove, I want to stay there. And then life
Yeah.
throws me something and then I
Of
have to
course.
learn, right? And
Yeah.
so if we realize that perhaps one of the tools for this listener is to pause and after leaning into it, saying, well, how could I grow from that? Maybe if that really worst case happened, maybe I would become stronger. Maybe I would become more independent. Maybe I would, be more careful about the next guy or person I went out with. So we can see that that is another way of
Mhm.
helping shift the brain by seeing where the growth potentials are. That's the idea of creating joy from fear.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. And it's it's hard when it is hard when you're in the moment of, let's say that worst case scenario, like you said, to think of growth, but I think that's almost like a superpower to work on, to recognize you can still have joy even in the dark seasons of your life. It's not going to be every second, of course. You're still allowed to have emotional pain and to, obviously feel your feelings, but also you can have the pockets of joy through that. And you can tell yourself things like, I'm strong, I can get through this, even if you don't believe it at first, but I'm strong, I can get through this. What am I learning from this? I'm growing as a person. Like those are the types of things that you can be telling yourself if this, again, worst case scenario happened, to start the process of getting through. And also remind yourself probably many other things that happened that you didn't expect to happen in your life that you did get through. So you were resilient at other points in your life, and you would be able to get through this possible worst case scenario if it were to pop up as well.
Thank you. And I love that you're really emphasizing that superpower. I love how you
Mhm.
phrased it.
Yeah.
That superpower of finding joy even in the dark seasons of life. And maybe especially in the dark seasons of
Mhm.
life, because those dark seasons, which are often the time when we're growing the most, we just don't realize it, or we have the potential for growth. If we can just pause, as you said, and do our breathing. And I'm a huge breathing fan. So,
Yeah.
listeners, neither of us are saying here that it is a cure-all, but it
No.
sure is amazingly helpful for so
Yes.
many things. Because if we pause and just breathe and try and find that flicker of joy inside the body, mind, or spirit, it's there. It's
Yeah,
waiting. And
it
if we
is.
just pause and notice it, that too interrupts negative thought patterns.
Hmm.
Because once we find that glimmer of joy, that little flicker, just by finding one kind thing to say about ourselves or about something we saw today, the wonder of life, whatever
Yeah.
it is, it does shift the negative thoughts.
Hmm. Yeah, being
We,
in that place of joy, being in that place, like you
mm,
said, of gratitude, it really does temporarily give your brain a break.
and the more breaks we give our brain, the more we upset those old hardwired patterns, the more we detangle them
Yes.
because we're creating new neural networks. Every
Hmm.
time you do something that interrupts those old neural networks, the ones that aren't
Hmm.
working for you, and you mindfully, intentionally harness it and put it in a different direction. I look at it like a highway, and that highway is really hardwired in of negative thoughts, obsessive thoughts. And yeah, you sometimes get on that highway, but learn to create detours and then mindfully see the detours and follow the detours. Sometimes you'll be back on that highway again. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I forgot the detour. And
Uh-huh.
until the detour becomes the friendly new scenic highway,
Yeah.
not that horrible traffic jammed highway filled with negative compulsive behaviors or obsessive thoughts. So this is fabulous. Now I have a question for you. In my work, I'm just going to break it down. I look at, I really outline it in my fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, how our feelings feed our thoughts,
Hmm.
feed our mindsets, feed our energy, then our actions.
Yes.
So, can you take using your own way of doing it? But I like looking at because it makes, if we break it down, it makes it so much more doable for someone
Yeah.
to notice, oh, well, my
Hmm.
emotions are giving rise to this thought or giving rise to this mindset, energy, and actions. A lot of it coming from patterns not earned, but learned in early
Yeah.
childhood. And again, we're suspecting that this individual has an insecure attachment issue that they may want to work on separately because this just really feels like insecure attachment. How would you recommend that, perhaps using that paradigm or your own paradigm, just breaking it down just a little bit more so that as a takeaway,
Mhm.
there are some foundational steps. Like, let's get into this in a more granular way so that any listener who's having obsessive thoughts, repetitive thoughts, they can just break it down.
Yeah. And you know, again, like you said, there really is such a connection with our thoughts and our feelings and our actions that we do. So it's not only is it important to recognize like what are your thought patterns, which is step one, but also understanding that that ultimately is affecting your actions. So that those thoughts and those feelings and the anxiety that's happening, the rumination that's happening is also affecting the conversations with the significant other, is affecting your reactions with the significant others, and not just the significant other, but other people around you as well, based on, excuse me, based on things that, partially things that you can work on managing. So I always think of even like emotional intelligence, for example, and the different parts of that and the awareness that comes with it and how you're relating to others and managing your emotions and feelings that come from also being aware of your thoughts as well. Um, but again, it's a process to sort of write it down. I'm a huge fan of writing things down, but of writing it down, writing out your thoughts, writing out your feelings, if you will, and working on changing them, as we mentioned earlier, and also allowing yourself to feel the support around you that can help you with that process as well. So it may or may not be, this person's significant other, it may be someone else in their lives or a professional. But the understanding, even and the awareness to know
Mm.
that the feelings and the thoughts and the actions are all correlated is what really can work on, um, this person can work on developing like a mindset shift.
That is wonderful and something that is easier to do, as you're saying, if we
Yeah.
pause to write it down.
Hmm.
Having a little binder, it doesn't have to be a fancy journal or anything,
Yeah.
something where you can break it down because when our minds get going, oh boy, do they
Yeah.
really take control? And often I recommend that people, once they realize they're in that space, put up a stop sign for yourself. A red
Yes.
stop sign, a yellow stop sign, whatever's meaningful to you, some sort of image in your brain that helps you realize,
Hmm.
okay, I want to stop. So if you've stopped, so now we could go, we'll just use the idea that who knows what's exactly happening that this individual is worried will happen, but cheating is such a common one, infidelity, betrayal, they're such common ones in relationships. So we might, as you said, start with the feeling. What's the feeling? Oh, I'm anxious. So then the thought might be, my significant other will betray me or cheat on me.
Hmm.
Then the mindset becomes, I am not safe.
Yeah.
Then the energy might be, I'm scared, I'm terrified, everything's going to go badly. And,
Yeah.
that's kind of very brittle energy. And then the action is likely something like being hyperreactive, being combative, shutting down. So if the individual is able, even retrospectively, even
Yeah.
after it happened, to go through and break it down in that way, then they can, the next time it comes up, or they can even practice with the boyfriend, with the best friend, by
Mhm.
looking in the mirror. They could
Yeah.
practice doing the same thing, saying, what's the feeling? Anxiety. What's the thought? And this is where then they could do the thought replacement you were talking about. My significant other might betray me. Okay, so what's a different thought? So you would put in the different thought. I will look for things that my partner does to keep me safe. Then the mindset might be, I feel a little more relaxed. Then
Yeah.
the energy is more tranquil. And
Hmm.
then the action is going to likely be more receptive over time. It's not going to
Yeah.
work like this magically, but the more this is practiced and broken down and put into writing, like you
Hmm.
said, and
Yeah.
journaling about it, the more in real time you won't you won't get it perfectly, especially if there are unresolved attachment issues or trauma issues underneath. It'll just take more time. But you're saying that by repeating this over and over again, they will create that mindset change
Hmm.
outlined in your book.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
Oh, it has been so wonderful to go through this process with you. I can see that you're giving us such beautiful steps that are simple, thorough, mindful, and something that can be done again in that very baby step approach
Yes.
and
Yes.
giving yourself grace as you change, that it may not feel like you're making many changes at first, but
Yeah.
it is, as you said earlier, it's a snowball. Once
Yeah.
they get going, it does create that sense of more ease in the self, and the
Hmm.
anxiety slowly goes away. And using those breathing techniques along the way does create a lot more spaciousness in the body and the mind,
Hmm.
and the emotional body and the spirit. Oh my goodness, Dr. Hammond, where can, or well, before I ask you where our listeners can find you, do you have any wrap-up comments to share with our listeners?
Sure. I would love to remind people that it's so important to work on making yourself your number one priority. I know that it's hard. I know that maybe sometimes you have to unlearn some things that you were taught earlier on about putting everything and everyone above you, but your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health are critically important for you, and you can show up powerfully for yourself and for the people around you.
I agree with you. It's so counterintuitive because we're told that
Yeah.
that's selfish,
Yes.
yet that's not selfish at all when
No.
we are self-mindful.
Yes.
and self-aware and take care of ourselves, then we are able to tend to others with more grace, more ease,
Yeah.
more patience. So it's that old idea of if you're in an airplane, you got to put the oxygen mask on
Yeah.
yourself before on other people, otherwise you'll pass out and you can't help anyone. So yes,
Exactly.
self-care. Anything else? I
The
know
other
you
th
have so much. I know you have so much.
the other thing is I want to remind people that I know that it's hard sometimes in life throws us all sorts of different curveballs, but there really is hope, especially when you do the work that you need to do, whatever that looks like for your self-care and wellness journey. There's a lot of hope for you. So I just want to remind people to keep going through this process and wish everyone good things in life. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And when you are a little low on hope, try and surround yourself with people who are uplifting, supportive,
Yes.
positive, because hope can easily drain away
Mhm.
if you're struggling on this life raft we call, you know, survival or life, and somebody's pulling you under from, that doesn't work. So you want some positive support in whatever form, as you said earlier. It might
Yeah.
be a best friend, a therapist, a pastor, a mentor, your partner, wherever you find that, a support group. So brilliantly done. Dr. Nekeshia, where can our listeners find you?
The best place to find me is my website. It's drnekeshiahammond.com, DRNEKESHIA Hammond.com.
And listeners, that will be in the show notes because it is a beautiful mouthful. But I will repeat it. Dr. Nekeshia, Nekeshia. Last name is Hammond with two M's, Hammond. And in the show notes, you will find links to her website as well as her wonderful book on mindset training, Conquer Your Mind, and the rest will follow. Thank you, Dr. Nikisha, so much for sharing your time and energy and wisdom with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure and such a joy. And listeners, I thank you for being with us today. I hope you found some wisdom and uplifting information in this episode. It is always such a pleasure to share time with you. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.